G'day guys, and welcome back to this week's Fishing Report, where we dive into what's been biting around Sydney. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to give you some tips and some secret spot locations that is going to catch you fish over this weekend. So stick around and find out where you might head out for a fish this weekend. First of all, let's get into what's been biting around Sydney. So over the past week, and especially over the last weekend, there was some really nice kings being caught. And kingfish season, I guess, has officially started. Over the last couple of weeks, I've sort of declared it being open and some nice fish being caught. But this week has probably been the best week so far. Seeing fish in excess of 75 centimetres, even a couple of metre plus kingfish caught in the Port Hacking and Botany Bay has been very good to see. They've been catching them mainly on live baits and a few on soft plastics. So on Saturday morning last weekend, there was a few bigger fish, a metre plus kingfish, caught on a live squid, live yellowtail, and there's even a few on nice 3-inch style paddle tail dollar bait junkie wave minnows as well. Like just a mixture of baits and liveys out on the kings. Now, in saying that, moving on into last Sunday, the kingfish went completely off the bite, and that's the key with kingfish. Kingfish can be very finicky. They will bite for periods of time, and they might bite one day and you go out the next and they won't bite it at all, but they're around. Using live baits has been the key in regards to catching some nice bigger size ones, and I guess over the next month or two we'll start seeing some more consistent captures on lures, particularly top water. Moving on into our salmon. The salmon have been around the kings, and if there's kingfish around, there's generally some salmon following. Whether it's the salmon is the first group of fish that might boil up some bait and then the kingfish are hanging around, or the kingfish are the ones that are ferociously feeding and the salmon being around. It's one of the two. Generally, if you're finding salmon, there will be kingfish around, and there's been some nice ones caught. I've caught a few over the last week on some surface walkers, which have been pretty cool. Just seeing the occasional slurp on the surface and you're like, oh, that might be a small fish. Casting it over there, winding it as fast as you can and twitching it the whole time. They come along and absolutely whack it. It's pretty cool surface action. And you know, coming out of winter and into spring, it's so cool to be able to catch some nice fish on those surface lures. Finally, speaking of surface lures, the whiting has started to come on the bite on our flats. Now, I know I teased it a couple of reports ago, and I went out and had a fish, caught a couple here and there, nothing special. But over the weekend, I managed to catch some really nice whiting on surface lures, mainly because I was going for kingfish and that wasn't really happening on that run-in tide. And once it got to the top end of that run-in tide, I went onto those flats and I was targeting whiting. Now, they were biting quite ferociously for a short period of time. Right as the tide turned to the top end of that tide turned into the back end of the run-out tide, so that first hour of that run-out, they were biting quite ferociously, and then they sort of switched off. I don't know why, but they switched off quite quickly. So I managed to get 3 or 4 really nice whiting on surface in the Port Hacking on the shallow sand flats. So that's what's been biting around Sydney. Let's get into some secret spots and some planning for the weekend. Now, looking at the weather, Saturday morning, we have a southerly breeze blowing, and it's blowing quite strong, 35, 40 k's an hour in the morning. Then it's backing off as it switches from a southerly to an east to eventually an east-northeast breeze in the afternoon. And as that swings from a southerly to an east-northeast breeze, the wind is slowly backing off. So if I'm looking at Saturday, what I'm planning on doing is going out in the afternoon. The swell's about 2.5 meters, so I'm not even thinking about going out offshore. But if we look at the tides, we've got a nice run-in tide in the afternoon with a high tide at about 4:30. So we'll have a top end of the tide in the afternoon, then a turn and a run out. So plan for me. I've still got 3 things that I would do in the afternoon as that tide comes in and then runs back out. As the tide goes into the top end of the tide, if you can get some live baits in the river, go grab some live yellowtail. Squid has been the number one live bait. If you can get squid within the rivers, great. Places like Botany Bay, Salmon Hall in the Port Hacking. Watts Reef is a really good one in Botany Bay. On the western side of Watts Reef is also some nice weed banks there that you should be able to get some nice squid if you can. If you can't, yellowtail. If not, plastic should be able to produce some nice kingfish in the afternoon. I'm going to fish the kingfish from about 2:30 to 5, the top end of that tide. Then, once that tide turns, up on the flats I'll go, targeting whiting on poppers. As that tide goes down, and if you can still fish all the way to dark for whiting on poppers, you should have some great afternoon, I reckon, on the whiting on surface on Saturday afternoon, and obviously the kingfish as well. If you can't, and your flat is going to be too shallow, towards the back end of then, I'd fish the edge for flathead on those edges. So sort of 3 options you can do. The first option, as that running tide goes from about 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, tugging out kingfish. Now, it might mean that you go out around midday, spend a couple hours getting a couple live bait for that 2-hour window and targeting some kingfish, or you could be straight out using plastics, whatever it is that you would like to use to target those. Spots for kingfish, the runways, obviously in Botany Bay, all those runways, I go away from where the boats are, from where all the boats are being anchored up. I'm going to be moving away from there. Unless there's a few people like burling up and stuff, it's always worthwhile to hang around there, throw a couple lures around where the burley trail is. Don't get too close to them, but close enough to be able to cast close enough to their burley trail to maybe find a nice king hanging around the back end of that trail. But for me, the majority of the time when I'm targeting kingfish, I'm going to be trying to go away from where the boats are. So I might head over to Watts Reef. I might head over to all the way down towards the mouth of the Cooks River there, all the bridges, Captain Cook Bridge, Tom Ugly's Bridge as well, to target the kingfish in Botany Bay. If you're in the Port Hacking, Lily Pilly, Southwest Arm, Northwest Arm even, all the way up to Swallow Rock have been producing some nice kingfish. Gymea Bay has also been really good. Burrownie Bay, where the salmon have been, the kingfish haven't been too far behind them as well. So there's some nice spots for your kingfish. Now for your whiting, Towra, there's a nice sand flat along Towra there that can produce some really nice whiting. All of that sort of southern side of Botany Bay is really good for our surface whiting in shallow. Trying to get up as shallow as you can in less than a metre of water, you're going to be able to find some whiting. If you find some nipper holes as well, that's also a really good sign. They're going to be not too far behind you. For the Port Hacking, Northwest Arm, just outside of Swallow Rock, there's a sand flat there as you leave outside of the Swallow Rock. That's a really good spot for our whiting, particularly the top end of the tide. And our main bar area, all the way along main bar, as far as you can go towards the rocky areas of main bar. So if you go onto the flat of main bar, it is huge, it is expansive. It's hundreds and hundreds of meters of areas. But on the top end of that tide, the whiting will push up as far up as they can. So if you follow them as far up as you can, great. Only issue with that is you've got to make sure you know your tides and know when you need to leave, because it is a bit of a trek to get back out. But that's where the biggest whiting are going to be. They're going to be as far away from the boats, far away from the traffic, and that's what you need to do as well. You need to push yourself away from everyone else, trying to find a quiet, cozy corner for yourself to have a fish. That's for the whiting. Now for our flathead for Saturday afternoon, places like Towra, there's a point there at Towra on that run out tide that just produces so much flathead. If you go back into a couple of my videos, the how to fish soft plastics one, I've got a drone footage of where I fish quite often. If you can match that up to where it is, it's around Towra. It's very easy to find. And that run out tide flathead, just perfect there. You just can't beat them. On soft plastics, using no bigger than a 3-inch style soft plastic, I like to use the Daiwa 2.35-inch prawn or the wave minnow, are all really, really good for the flathead. So that's in the Botany Bay region. Warrenora River also run out tide. You can't beat it in the afternoon. Flathead just absolutely go on the chew as well. Even their shallow sand flats, you got some really good whiting there too. Warrenora is also another really good spot for that. For the Port Hacking for flathead, Northwest Arm, again that shallow sand flat there. The edges around that shallow sand flat also produce some really nice flathead. Now that run out tide, you might stay up on the flat and then come out, fish that corner there. For flathead, it does get a bit busy though on a good day when there's a lot of boat traffic going around. And sometimes it can be quite hard, but there's a few other little banks there that you can try as well. For flathead, on the main bar, again, if it is quiet, is a really good spot again for that edge. And Lily Pilly, Southwest Arm are like the 3 big ones that I would use to target flathead. Again, boat traffic is going to be the key. Go find a nice quiet spot if you can. Now, Sunday morning is looking the best out of all of them. We've got a northwest breeze all the way pushing out to a typical nor'easter. So it's starting to turn into those summer conditions where that nor'easter comes around midday and starts to blow quite hard into the afternoon. That's a traditional wind here in Sydney in summer. So we're going to nor'easter in the morning. I'm going to be targeting the morning to be able to go out and have fish. But it's going to be the complete opposite to Saturday. We've got a high tide at about 5:20 in the morning, and it's going to run out to a low tide at about 10:30, 11 o'clock. The only difference is between the Saturday afternoon tide that I was talking about and this one is the actual depth of tide. So from where it is at its peak to where it is at its lowest is a little bit less, so the tide's not going to be pushing as much. That's mainly because we're in between moons. We're in the lead up to the new moon now. Fishing is always pretty good in the lead up to the new moon and after the new moon, but the tides can be very different. So the afternoon tide on Sunday afternoon is quite a bigger tide. Now, if you want to push out into that nor'easter and fish that afternoon tide, go for it. But I'm going to be fishing the morning, Sunday morning in particular. What I'm going to be doing is going back to a bit of bread and butter fishing. So high tide in the morning, I'm going to go up to main bar, push up into the main bar, get my nippers really quickly. Main bar is still on high tide, is quite shallow, and particularly on this tide, it's not a big high tide. So I should still be able to pump out a handful of nippers, about 20 or 30 is all I'm going to need. Right outside, what I'm going to be doing is drifting along the edges with some nippers and some soft plastics, fishing the soft plastics and just having a few nippers out the back as well to see if we can't get a few flathead and bream as well. Reasons why I'm doing that, I normally will fish soft plastics religiously. Just want to see, just want to experiment with it a little bit. Going to have a couple of nippers out, just very lightly weighted and just drifting out the back and seeing if I do miss a flathead on a soft plastic while I'm fishing at the front of the boat, whether it would actually go back and target that nibber eventually and see the difference, see what will catch more fish. Will it be the soft plastics or will it be the live nippers? Again, what you could also do is just fish soft plastic solely or fish bait solely. Go and run outside. Okay, now run out tides, I've talked about this for weeks and weeks and weeks. Flathead, run out tide, bottom half of it. And because we have a high tide at about 5:30, what you could do, if get up really early, go up to the top end of that tide, fish for some whiting on the sand flats, on surface lures. Okay, fish for them on surface lures, see if you can get a few. If you don't, wait for that tide to reach at about 8 o'clock, which is about halfway, then target your flathead on the edges, flicking soft plastics and trying to catch them that way. So, spots for that. Spots outside of what I've talked about already, because again, Towra, Northwest Arm, all probably easy ones to be able to figure out. So in the Bonny Bay, Georges River area, outside Como, on the western side of Como, there's a nice sandbank right next to the bridge there. And in this tide, it's going to be producing some really nice fish. I'd be fishing the sandbank or on the left-hand side of that tide on Sunday morning, fishing with soft plastics, working it down the edges, and if you're at the top of the tide, using the sand flats to see if you can get some nice whiting. Caught some really good whiting and flathead in that spot. On the eastern side of that bridge as well, there's a sand flat as well that you can use. Again, run out tide, fish that edge, should be in for some really nice flathead. So that's a different spot for you guys to have there for the Georges River, Botany Bay area. Now in the Port Hacking, if I was doing the run out tide in the Port Hacking, Darook Beach, if you look up Darook Beach, is right outside Gunnamatta Bay. Now, Gunnamatta Bay on the eastern side has a big sand flat that opens up into the main part of the Port Hacking. That eastern side sand flat, I'd be fishing that on the run out all the way up to the mouth of that river, fishing that edge there on that run out tide. You'll be able to produce some really nice flathead. That's where I've caught my PB. I've caught an 87 centimeter flathead there. So there's a few spots for you guys and a few tactics to be able to go and have a fish this weekend. Hope you all use my advice and go out and catch a few